What's the thickness of the columns?
The columns have steel 6mm thick. Yeah. So I'll show you where we select those. So now that we've got our grid in place, we're going to select a structural column. So some of you may have used the column tool already. There's two sides to it. There's architectural and structural. Architectural columns are not as loaded, I guess. They don't come with as much information. They don't have the link to the sort of structural world of structural engineering. So they don't carry the information about all the little dimensions and fillets and widths and all the rest. The language here is a little different. We're just going to kind of isolate the crucial stuff. We're not going to get bogged down in what all the little dimensions mean. Try to keep this as simple as we can. So under the column tool, I want to use the drop down so that I can access structural column. And it works just like everything else that we've seen. You click the tool, and then in the properties window, you see what type it's about to place an instance of. That one there that it's displaying is a wide flange kind of I-beam column. That's not what we want. We want a different type. If I use the drop down here for the type selector, I see that there really isn't many options there. So I'm going to have to go shopping here in the library folders. So I'm going to click on Load Family. Okay, so that's our first trick here. Architecture tab, click on the column, expand it so that we can get a structural column. We don't see what we want in the type window, so we're going to go Load Family. This button right here takes us to our libraries here. We're going to look in the folder called Structural Columns, Steel, and we're going to pick this one right here. So M_HSS Hollow Structural Section Column. And this is a family. So it's a really broad family. It's got lots and lots and lots of information, lots of options in it. So the next window that we're going to see is another way to kind of select and refine our exact choice a little more. It's not going to load the entire family in. It would just be too much information and kind of bog down the memory. So it takes us to another level where we select something a little more specific. Okay, so make sure everybody's on this step first before we get to the next one. Okay, so we want, I'm in the Canada folder, Structural Columns, Steel, and I want HSS. Click on Open. Okay, now again, there's a lot of structural lingo in here. We don't need to be completely familiar with it. We're just going to kind of go by the type column here, and we're going to look for an HSS that matches what we're after as closely as possible. What you'll see is there's a section here for 152.4 millimeter columns, so that's roughly 6 inches. We want a square one, and we want the one that is 6.4 millimeters, and that just tells us that we got roughly a 1/4 inch worth of steel, okay, wrapped into a hollow structural section. So we want the HSS 152.4 by 152.4 by 6.4. The crucial dimensions here are the HT and the B. You can see that it gives us a 152 by 152. Okay, so in structural terms, we've got HT and B. Don't ask me why they use those letters. These are questions for your structural instructor. Okay, so just to write on the board again what we want the HSS 152.4 by 152.4 by 6.3. Thank you. And click OK. Now we'll see that change in the type selector window here. Now we've got that HSS column. And you can see that it's already following your cursor around, so it's ready for placement. And it'll snap right to the grid intersection point. So just place one right there. Okay, now you might get a warning telling you it's not appearing yet. That's fine, it's in there. It's just in this first floor view, we can't see it just yet. And we'll make the changes necessary so that we can. A good idea when you're working with structural components like this to just change your detail level to fine. And then we're also going to put our visual style to shaded. I'm going to switch over to a 3D view here, just so I can see where that column is. So it is in the project. We just have to play with its height a little bit. And we might have to adjust the view range for first floor as well. The other thing I would like everybody to do, so everyone pay attention. I guarantee you if you don't listen now, you will ask this question eventually in the class. So type in TL. Okay? So TL. This should be the default in Revit, but it's not. TL reduces those thick, ridiculous Crayola lines to something more manageable. Okay? Notice here as well, this is a good way to kind of make the point about the display settings. Notice that if I'm in a coarse display, all I see is a single line. So the display for a column, really quite misleading. It doesn't really give you any crucial information, so not advisable. We should switch this to at least medium. Notice that when I go to medium, it displays the full model column, but it doesn't round the edges. And that is, in fact, how it's actually going to be generated in Revit, so we might as well see it. If I switch from medium to fine, then it shows me those filleted edges there. Okay, and I'm going to switch this to shaded. There we go. So I get a good representation of what that column's all about. Now, to kind of deal with this issue of not being able to see it in my main floor view, I'm going to switch to an elevation view here and see exactly where it is that it placed that column. Again, I've got to switch this to a fine level of detail, and then I'll switch to shaded as well. So this is why I couldn't see it in my main floor view. Notice that in these elevation views I can see the grid lines as well. So it doesn't just display them in my floor plan, it also makes that addition for my elevation views and section views as well. I wasn't really paying attention to the settings in my property window when I placed the column, so this is kind of what it left me with. Not a big deal, and this may have just been kind of left over from some other project I did. All I'm going to do now is just change the base level offset from -2500, for whatever reason it was at that level, to 0. Now I'll get this warning, of course, because I need to tell it first that my top level needs to be underside of steel deck, and now it'll let me make that switch. Okay, so that gives me a column that spans from level 1 up to my underside of steel deck level. Okay, so just, if you're catching up, just have a look over here in the properties window at how I've adjusted the level settings for this column. Okay, and if you've got a handle on that, I'm just going to jump ahead to the next step here, and I'll stop the recording and deal with any concerns that came up. If you've got that in place, you can do this one of two ways. I'm going to use the array tool, and I'm just going to put this column at every single point around the project. Okay, you can do that. You can use the array, or if you want, maybe just to get a feel for how the snapping works with regards to columns and grids, you can also just use the column tool as well. But I've got that one selected. I'm going to click on array. And when I've done that, remember the way that the array tool works is I specify whether I'm going to move this column to the last and then divide the number between that space, or if I'm just going to select second, move the column to the second spot, and then it'll take that increment and then apply it however many times I want to copy it. So I'll do that one. I'll stick with second. I'm going to enter the number 4 here. The total is the number including the one you already have. So if you're adding 3, you're going to end up with a total of 4, so enter that number here. And once I've gotten that in place, all I have to do is just click on this grid line and then the next one to it, and it'll put those columns on the structural, or the intersections of the structural grid lines for 2, 3, and 4. And when that's done, all I need to do is just click on, I'm going to select all those columns, and then I'll use my array tool again. And same thing, I'm just going to use move to second. The number this time instead of 4 is going to be 5. And then I'm just going to click on A, drop down to B, and it'll place columns at each one of those grid intersection points. And I'll just do a final 3D visual check here. And my columns are now all in place.